The meeting is properly constituted. I'll call it to order. I would start by asking colleagues if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Hearing none. Before we get into the regularly scheduled business, I would like to just read onto the record a statement on behalf of the board, and that is, this is the first time since the board has met since the incident that took place at Yonge and Finch on April the 23rd. And I'd like to begin by saying a few words about that tragic day. First and foremost, the board extends its sincere condolence to the victims of the attack and to their families. We know that the entire city of Toronto has been affected by this terrible incident, and we join the community in its grief. We also stand with Torontonians as they rally and rebound, united by a dedication to our city as a caring and peaceful place. As a team, all of the first responders should be applauded for their incredible response to a chaotic and fast-moving situation. This very much includes our communication operators who dealt with a huge volume of challenging calls calmly and with the utmost professionalism. We commend all of our police officers who witnessed the tragic scene and confronted a complex and unpredictable situation with poise, focus, humanity, and compassion. In particular, we're immensely grateful to P.S.A. Ken Lamb, who with remarkable display of professionalism and courage was able to successfully arrest the suspect without incident. Indeed, the Toronto Police Service has received worldwide attention and accolades for its handling of this tragic incident. We know that the actions of all of the members involved in this incident highlight the excellence of the Toronto Police Service. Our officers are trained to deal with people in crisis through de-escalation and safely resolving challenging situations on a daily basis. And lastly, Chief Saunders, we are grateful to you for your excellent leadership and composed conviction during this really challenging time. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the men and women of the service. Thank you. Chief Saunders?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board, for that support that I will definitely pass on to all of the sworn and civilian. It's greatly appreciated, and just want to not overlook when we go back and revisit the amazing citizenship that took place during that incident, the amount of not just private sector, but just ordinary citizens that stepped up to the plate, went into life-saving mode to help those that they possibly could in that time of need, really, I think, represents what Toronto is about. And just wanted to make sure that didn't go unnoticed as well. We as first responders who were there certainly were able to appreciate the tremendous work that so many people stepped up to do in that moment as well, too, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Next, I think we have a confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of April 18th, 2018. And there is a motion on the board there to make an amendment to correction. Yeah, so it's just reduced the special fund by 30,000, not 31,000 as indicated in the report. So a motion to accept the amended motion, Ms. Muller, seconded Councillor Hart, all in favor, any contrary? As mentioned at the last meeting, Councillor Chin Lee, who'd served on this board with distinction for, in fact, in 2 separate terms, has indeed tendered his resignation. He made extraordinary contribution, I think, to our deliberations over, as I say, 2 terms and a number of years. But he also served as the vice chair, and so that leaves us with a vacancy, and we need to elect a vice chair. Have you got something that you...
there's a deputation first.
Oh, okay, so we'll take the deputation first, and that is, it didn't surprise me, Derek Moran. Derek, you know the rules. 5 minutes and a 1-minute warning.
Just want to say about me speaking at this meeting, it should not be in any way my consent expressed or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. Take notice, Chair Pringle, the definition in Black's Law Dictionary, 9th edition, for impugn is to challenge or call into question, example, a person's character, the truth of a statement, etc. It's really just a running in-joke between me, Meritori, and Councillor Thompson. So based on my lived experience recently at City Hall, talking at Economic Development, Audit Committee, and Executive Committee, this is my argument for not making anyone else from the City of Toronto the next Vice Chair of the Toronto Police Services Board. People who work for the City of Toronto are in a cult. They work there because at one time, they may have had the idea that they wanted to make a difference. Now, most of them have become infected with, I just don't want to do anything that will jeopardize my job and my pension, like doing the right thing itis. They call this the Webster effect at the City of Toronto. This cult teaches them that they are above all of you. They are paid with money taken by force from others, and they know they're getting away with it. Because of this, they now think it is their right to take away your rights and freedoms, because they look around and now realize, oh, who is going to stop us? And that is a right to do what they do, even if it means ignoring their own rules, by ignoring the legal definitions they use for what they will say is the greater good for the rest of us. Feeding their families is more important than respecting your rights and freedoms, even if it means as a result of harming your family. So I just want to point out at Scarborough Executive Committee, Mayor Tory was quite clear with me that it's an opportunity to go there and here to make a deputation. As I've mentioned here before, because there's actually no definition for deputation in the Dictionary of Canadian Law or Black's Law Dictionary, then one would then use the definition found in a regular dictionary and not the one in the board's bylaws meant to harm us by creating joinder into statutory jurisdiction as the person. So in the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, the definition of deputation is a group of people appointed to represent others, usually for a specific purpose, a delegation. I want to thank someone named Tiffany Ford, who on Twitter reminded me recently something about Councillor Crawford said about coming to delegate at the budget consultation earlier this year. This is from Black's Law Dictionary, 9th edition, delegate. One who represents or acts for another person or a group. Now the definition for an uninstructed delegate is a delegate who is not instructed and may therefore vote according to his or her conscience. The definition for instructed delegate is a delegate bound to vote according to a constituency's expressed wishes. Definition of will in Black's Law Dictionary is wish, desire, choice. Constituent, a person who gives another the authority to act as a representative, a principal who appoints an agent, someone who is represented by a legislator or other elected official, one part of something that makes up a whole, an element. I like that one. I'm one guy in the population of Toronto, right? So I wish to make a deputation. I'm about to contradict myself. I appoint the Toronto Police Services Board to act as the trustees for me in this matter, as it is my express wish that Councillor Hart be voted the next Vice Chair of the Toronto Police Services Board. Take notice that my instructions are for the Toronto Police Services Board to vote for Councillor Hart as its next Vice Chair, barring any objections, of course. Are there any objections? And the reason I'm doing this is because he actually did the right thing for my father. Someone at the City of Toronto didn't actually screw my father over. He did the right thing. It had something to do with power lines. It took a while because it's the City of Toronto. Nothing ever moves fast there, right? But in the end, I'll always remember that. And that audit committee, not the past one, but the last one, he's kind of shocked the Auditor General when he said, we're talking about a fraud here. Was this fraud reported to the City of Toronto? And she kind of seemed stunned, like somebody would actually have the nerve to ask that, because, Toronto police don't seem to investigate any frauds that go on, suspected frauds or breach of trust at the City of Toronto. So I want Councillor Hart as the next Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. 19 seconds left, so perfect. Colleagues, any questions?
If I had
of
19
Derek?
seconds left, why'd you give me this one?
Well, because it looked like you're going to go on a little longer.
Well, I still had 19 seconds left, though.
Okay.
Give it to me later on. I got two more
Sure.
times.
Deal. Any questions of Derek? Derek, thank you very much. Colleagues, having had the deputation, their nominations are, Carlene, would you just read the rules here?
In accordance with subsection 28(2) of the Police Services Act, the board will now elect a vice chair. The vice chair shall act as the chair if the chair is absent or if the chair's position is vacant. Nominations for the position of vice chair will now be accepted. Who would like to nominate the vice chair?
I'm pleased to follow suit with our last deputant and nominate you, Jim Hart, as Vice Chair for the Toronto Police Services Board. I believe you bring a unique set of skills, both from your public service perspective and your elected perspective. Thank you.
Marie Molliner has nominated Jim Hart. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Mayor Tory. Does the candidate agree to be nominated?
Yes, I do. It's an honor to be nominated. Thank you.
Are there any further nominations? Hearing none, the nominations will be closed. Marie Molliner has nominated Jim Hart, which was seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion carried.
Unanimous. Congratulations, Councillor Hart, and thank you. Thank you, Carly. So let's get on. We have a presentation. Let's go through the agenda here, ladies and gentlemen. Item number 5, as I say, is not only the annual report and presentation, but there's a deputation. Item number 6, request for funds extension of the walk-on program or walkabout program into 52, 14, and 55 divisions. A motion to approve. Ms. Mulliner.
I don't want to hold the item, but I just want to commend the service on this initiative. I think it's exceptional, and I look forward to it coming back next year, perhaps with some feedback from both the service and the participants on how it can be perhaps expanded. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So, proposed by Ms. Mulliner, seconded by Councillor Hart. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 7, request for special funds for Gatehouse, Healing the Voice Within, art exhibit and fundraising ticket purchase. Motion to approve. Mayor Tory, seconded by Ms. Shanta Casera. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 8 is the request for special funds for Black Youth Leadership Conference in the fall of 2018. Motion to approve. Ms. Shanta Casera and Ms. Muller, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 9 is Canadian Association of Police Governance 2018 Annual Conference. Motion to approve. Councillor Hart, seconded. Ms. Shanta Casera, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 10, the Antares TDC vendor of record for vehicle auxiliary battery management system. Motion to approve. Ms. Mulliner, seconded. Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Carried. Item number 11 is the master purchasing agreement for extension and vendor of record for Intergraph Canada Limited. Motion to approve. Councillor Hart and Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 12 is the contract extension vendor of record for closed circuit TV system equipment supply, installation, and maintenance. A motion to approve. Mr. Jeffers and Councillor Hart, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 13 is the contract for supply and delivery of uniform clothing, the uniform group. Motion to approve. Councillor Hart and Ms. Santa Casera, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 14, the 2018 operating budget variance for the Toronto Police Service period ended March 31st, 2018. Motion to approve. Yes.
I just want to say the recommendation says that it's to go along with the city council for inclusion in the master mechanic Pringle, but it's to go along for inclusion in the city's variance report, and I think there's some discussion yet to be had with the city just on exactly how all this is calculated. Certainly the officials have brought that to my attention, so I just wanted to say this is the report that it is, and it will be sent along, but I think it will be the subject of some discussion when it gets over there. Thank you.
With that, motion to approve. Councillor Hart, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 15 is 2018 operating budget variance for the Toronto City Police Parking Enforcement Unit. The period ended March 31st, 2018. A motion to approve. Mr. Jeffers and Councillor Hart, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 16, the 2018 capital budget variance report, Toronto Police Service, period ended March 31st, 2018. Is there? Okay, so we'll hold it. Item number 17, which is the operating budget variance report for the Toronto, no, there's a deputation on that, so hold that, 17. Item number 18, on the consent agenda, the minutes of the Central Joint Health and Safety Committee. Motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, seconded Ms. Sandra Kazera. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 19 is City Council recommendation keeping Toronto safe by ammunition control. Motion to approve. Is that a motion to approve or receive? To approve. So motion to approve. Mayor Tory and Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Over the page, item number 20 is the quarterly report, occupational health and safety update, January 1st to the 31st, 2018. A motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, seconded. Ms. Shanda Kazera, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 21, the semi-annual report, publication of expenses, July to December 2017. Motion to receive. Councillor Hart, seconded Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 22, the annual report, April 2017 to March 31st, 2018, grant applications and contracts. Motion to receive. Ms. Santa Kazera, Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? And finally, motion to receive Councillor Chen Lee's resignation from the Toronto Police Service Board. Ms. Santa Kazera and Councillor Hart, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. So that brings us back first to item number 5. There is a deputation and a presentation. We do the presentation first. Yes. So, Staff Superintendent Carter, who is... Yep. Well, try it again, Randy.
1, 2, 3.
Yep.
It's okay, I'd like to stand here.
Yep. Perfect.
So thank you very much. This afternoon I'll present a very quick presentation that centers on some of the high points of our annual report. Before I go forward, I need to ask, please, for an amendment on the actual board report that comes with the annual report. You can have a dozen set of eyes look at this and still find something on the last day. So on page 2, under the discussion section, it reads an increase in the number of public complaints, and that's wrong. It's a decrease. So we want to celebrate that where we can.
That's very major, but thanks, Randy.
Sorry, got to where it got.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so on our first slide, so our professional standard support is one of the units within our corporate risk management pillar, has within it a section for awards. And in 2017, working with yourselves, the Police Services Board, we awarded 708 corporate awards, which were held through 8 public ceremonies on our front lobby. These are awards to celebrate excellence in service delivery and, of course, truly demonstrate where we've lived up to our word and values by doing all we can do in the situations we're called to. So that was 708 awards in 2017, and by comparison, in 2016, it was 811. We also, this year, gave out a Mental Health Excellence Award on behalf of the board. You'll remember that it was to acknowledge the creation and delivery of a negotiator skill set workshop for de-escalation skills for our frontline responding police officers. That awards section also works with external partners, which includes the St. John's Ambulance and the Toronto Region Board of Trade, much like we celebrated this week for 2018. And in 2017, there were 461 members recognized for their great work. I'll touch on now public complaints, and you'll see a reference beside the title on the slides as it refers to the annual report if we have other questions in relation to that. So in 2017, the Office of the Independent Police Review Director received 638 public complaints about the policy, service, or conduct of police officers of the Toronto Police Service. And again, that represents a 6.2% decrease over 2016. This doesn't sound like it's working here properly. All right? Okay, thank you. So of that 638, 325 of them are actually assigned to investigation. So you can see that just under half of them are screened out by the OIPRD as either being frivolous or vexatious or for other reasons. So of that 325, both the OIPRD and members of our organization investigated those complaints. 6 of those related to policy, 24 related to service, and 295 of them related to the conduct of an officer. I'll just remind that, so in 2016, there were 680 complaints, so we're just down from that. I'll remind you that policy and service have remained fairly consistent over the last 5 years. Typical policy complaints arrive from our clearance letter counter and the results that come from that. And in our service complaints, we're seeing typically complaints about us not coming or not calling back complainants or arriving at collision scenes, which is something we're getting better at sharing expectations with our modernized policing. There was also, we track in the report the judicial comments that come out and often are seen in the media, and in 2017 we investigated 5 of those. What we found that was there was no criminality, no criminality, but unit level penalties and often retraining arriving from them. So when I go to the output of public complaints, you'll see that 37% of those that we investigated were unsubstantiated after investigation in 2017. 16% were withdrawn by the complainant before we were able to resolve them. 21% were informally resolved with the complainant, so we've had a chance to sit down and talk about expectations and then leave with everyone content, and then 6% were substantiated as misconduct. Now I'll speak to the more serious offenses under the Police Services Act Code of Conduct. In 2017, 35 of our officers were charged with offenses under the Code of Conduct in what represented 44 cases before the tribunal, which is 5% less than in 2016. And of those 44 cases, 7 of them were directed by the Office of the Independent Police Review Director. And you can see that 36% of those cases relate to off-duty conduct allegations. I'll speak now to incident resolution. And again, just remind us that use of force is reported when our officers display, point, or fire a weapon, or when a soft hand technique results in an injury. And so in 2017, there was a total of 1,245 incidents where use of force reports were submitted. You might see in the actual annual report when you're looking at a different number alongside of that, because that's the number of actual reports. Sometimes more than one officer at an incident uses the force that requires a report. And we've reported out in other areas where we had 2.9 million documented contacts with the public in Toronto in 2017. So of those 2.9 million, there were 1,245 incidents where we reported a use of force of that magnitude, which is slightly up over 2016 by 6%. So I'll touch on the ones that I know of are most interest to all of us, and that is the use of our conducted energy weapons. And in 2017, the demonstrated force presence I'll remind you, this is reported out a lot more robustly to you in April of every year. But the conducted energy weapon, the demonstrated force presence for it, we did that 184 times. The drive stun is where our officers have actually had to physically contact the person with the weapon in the leg or shoulder, and it was 13. And then our full deployment is where the trigger's activated and prongs come out, was 111. In 2016, that was 11% less in 17 than 2016 for full deployment. So our officers are becoming a lot more comfortable with the use and when they can and can't use them, as well as instances where they're needed. Also, the less lethal shotgun, or SOC gun, as we commonly refer to it, in 2017 was pointed 48 times to resolve an incident and actually had to be discharged 11 times. And that's up only a few from 2016. You'll remember, too, that we've expanded now the CEW to our frontline constables, and I can tell you that we have our first 37 constables trained this past weekend, and so there's 37 more devices that are out there, and they're not all out there right now, depending on when people are working, but there's 37 with their constables. Again, on incident resolution, we'll speak of firearms. In 2017, we discharged our firearms 19 times. We pointed them at a person just over 1,000 times and had to draw them only 185 times. And on the left side of this slide, you'll see how that breaks down the 19. Of the 19 times that we had to discharge our firearm, 13 of them were because an animal was injured or aggressive, and 6 times it was because somebody was armed or we believed them to be armed. And again, applying that against the 2.9 million contacts gives us a percentage with a lot of zeros. In 2016, as a reminder, we discharged our firearm 34 times. And of course, I should also say that we achieved 0 deaths in 2017 as a result of those uses of force. So, speak to Special Investigations Unit now. The Special Investigations Unit invoked its mandate 92 times, involving scenarios that met the threshold in the legislation with our officers. In 2016, there was 74 of those. The largest number is still defined as in custody, and you'll remember that for the purposes of our audience, in custody can include incidents that involve taking control of a person, exercising control of a person, but also attempting to control or attempting to regain control of a person. So it's often, I think, misunderstood that somebody was actually in our custody and they've been injured, or in 2017, 5 times they died. But sometimes that definition can be somebody who's taken their own life as we arrived on scene and the SIU invoked, and then probably afterwards uninvoked. So now my next slide, suspect apprehension pursuits. In 2017, we had an increase in the number of times that our officers put a fail to stop report in, which you'll remember the province requires when our officers activate their emergency equipment to stop a vehicle and it fails to stop. And so that is the output of an investigation into that, because we might find that person later and then be able to continue that investigation. And then 160 times in 2017 where a pursuit was initiated. And the law, while we certainly empower our police officers to investigate problems that are out there, there's some strict consideration about getting involved in pursuits, and that we shall determine whether the immediate need to identify the car and driver or apprehend any of the occupants outweighs the risk to public safety. So you'll see that there was 160 pursuits initiated, and 65% of the time, our initiating officer is the one who stopped pursuing the vehicle. And there were 0 deaths in 2017 as a result of suspect apprehension pursuits. So I'll wrap up here with just some training highlights from our Toronto Police College, which is part of our area of business. The Mental Health Commission of Canada Road to Mental Readiness Program is still something we're very proud of. It's having a good effect with the members that we're able to get it in front of. And you can see we've had 1,274 supervisors trained so far, 1,604 non-supervisors, and 53 of us white shirts have also gone up there and gone through it. And driver training, we continue to train on safe driving, as well as suspect apprehension pursuits. We use a driving simulator that some of you saw a little example of last year. and our in-service training program. In our in-service training program, we concentrate on many things, but there's an emphasis on a freedom from bias, where we're committed to improving our accountability, our trust, and our confidence, and then also de-escalation. Of course, your comments about the April 23rd event are something that we know happens quite often. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's captured by a third party on a cell phone camera, but that is an example I think we'll hear about at the end of the day of de-escalation. So those are the highlights of that annual report, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have of us. Okay. That's right.
Extraordinary when you consider a city the size of Toronto, the fourth largest city in North America. We know we got 27,500 calls about people in mental distress last year, but the target set by the Akabuchi report was always zero harm, zero death, and so it's great to see that. Mark?
It is, and I just want to validate the point that the research is continuous and it is comprehensive. So we have people that are looking worldwide on a continuous basis to see what the best practices are in case there is anything new that comes out, so that we have an understanding of whether or not it is something that we can apply in order to reach our successful outcomes.
Victoria?
Well, I might just add to that, I think out of the same 2.9 million calls, the fact that there were only 6 discharges of firearms related to people, armed people, and of course the objective there has to be 0 as well, but I mean, it's down 44% year over year, which I think is exactly where we want it to be going, and so I think combined with the 0 deaths, the other thing that we want to see, if we can, and is 0 discharges, but 6, I think most people out there would be surprised that it's that number out of 2.9 million contacts, and I think we want to keep that number going down.
Yeah, I agree, but I think I hope our friends in the media who are here are picking up on this, because I think it's just extraordinary for a city of our size, and complexity, therefore, it's important that we celebrate that and recognize it. Jim?
That's exactly what I wrote down on my sheet as well, the 6 out of 2.9 million. I think it bears repeating, and these good news stories sometimes don't get picked up in the media, and I think saying it twice doesn't hurt. It's a pretty incredible number.
Thank you, Randy. If you could just stay there for a few minutes. We have, I think, 2 deputations. The first one is for 5 minutes and 19 seconds is Derek Moran.
So in this report, it says Part 5 of the P.S.A. outlines the complaint process and defines misconduct. Part 5 also defines the responsibilities of the chief of police or designate with respect to alleged officer misconduct, and outlines the penalties and resolution options in the event that serious misconduct is proven in a police tribunal. The TPS tribunal is governed by the Statutory Powers Procedure Act of Ontario. Now, I don't think most people realize that tribunals are not courts, say like a court of equity. And I just need to know that Chief Saunders and his high-ranking officers here know what the Supreme Court of Canada has had to say about tribunals, so I'm going to be speaking on that. Take notice in Multaney versus Commission Scolaire, Marguerite Bourgeois, 2006, the Supreme Court of Canada said, the same reasoning applies in the context of administrative law. Like the courts, administrative tribunals are bound by the Canadian Charter, their enabling legislation, and the statutes they are specifically responsible for applying. Like the courts, they cannot be treated as parties with an interest in a dispute. A tribunal's decision should not be subject to a justification process as if it were a party to a dispute. Take notice in R versus Conway, 2010, Supreme Court of Canada said, Section 24.1 of the Constitution states, anyone whose rights or freedoms as guaranteed by this charter have been infringed or denied may apply to a court of competent jurisdiction to obtain such remedy as the court considers appropriate and just in the circumstances. We do not have one charter for the courts and another for administrative tribunals. This truism is reflected in the court's recognition that the principles governing remedial jurisdiction under the Charter apply to both courts and administrative tribunals. It is also reflected in the jurisprudence flowing from Mills and the Cuddy-Chicks trilogy, according to which rare exceptions, administrative tribunals with the authority to apply the law have the jurisdiction to apply the Charter to the issues that arise in the proper exercise of their statutory functions. The jurisprudential evolution has resulted in this court's acceptance not only of the proposition that expert tribunals should play a primary role in the determination of charter issues falling within their specialized jurisdiction, but also that in their exercising their statutory discretion, they must comply with the Charter. Take notice in Greater Vancouver Transportation Authority versus Canadian Federation of Students, British Columbia Component 2009, the Supreme Court of Canada said, policies are not administrative in nature as they are not meant for internal use as an interpretive aid for rules laid down in the legislative scheme. Rather, the policies are themselves rules that establish the rights of the individuals to whom they apply. The question that arises is this: does a given policy or rule emanating from a government entity satisfy the prescribed by law requirement? It can be seen from the case law that a distinction must be drawn between rules that are legislative in nature and rules that are administrative in nature. What Committee for the Commonwealth of Canada and Little Sisters demonstrate is a concern about the administrative nature of the policies and guidelines of the government entities in question. Administrative rules relate to the implementation of laws contained in a statutory scheme and are created for the purpose of administrative efficiency. The key question is thus whether the policies are focused on indoor management. In such a case, they are meant for internal use and are often informal in nature. Express statutory authority is not required to make them. Such rules or policies act as interpretive aids in the application of a statute or regulation. They cannot, in and of themselves, be viewed as law that prescribes a limit on a charter right. An interpretive guideline or policy is not intended to establish individuals' rights and obligations or to create entitlements. Moreover, such documents are usually accessible only within the government entity and are therefore unhelpful to members of the public who are entitled to know what limits there are on their charter rights. No matter how broadly the word law is defined for the purposes of Section 1, a policy that is administrative in nature does not fall within the definition because it is not intended to be a legal basis for government action. And I hate to break it to everyone, but guess what? The Statutory Powers Procedure Act is lacking. That's right, the enacting clause required by Section 6 of the Legislation Act. And actually, I want to save my 19 seconds for the next item I'm speaking on. Am I at 5 minutes? I'm finished. Okay.
Colleagues, questions of Derek?
Fair is fair.
No, that's the deal. That's okay. Thank you. The next deputy is Brenda Ross. Brenda, thank you. You've got 5 minutes. I'll give you the 1 minute warning.
If you don't mind, I need a second to hand something out before I start.
Yep,
please.
you can hand up before I start.
Thank you.
Ken, perhaps you'd help Brenda just pass those around.
Mr. Jeffers, could you please make sure everybody gets one of these? Sure. Thank you for your kindness. And I also need them to get one of these. Mr. Vanziana, could you help? Thank you. Mr. Jeffers, I need you to have this. This is just for you. Could somebody please pass this to Mr. Hart?
Okay, Brenda,
To
you ready to
Mr.
go?
Kala? One more second, please, Chairman Pringle. I'm going to be speaking about page 7 of the agenda, item number 5. The topic that I want to talk about is bias. Everybody ready? Let's go then.
Yeah, yep.
Bias is a bullet that can kill. So while we're all talking about how police officers didn't actually take out a gun and shoot anybody, it doesn't mean they weren't responsible for anybody's death. It just means they didn't shoot them down dead. I put to you that the Toronto Police Service has completely failed in their promise of zero tolerance for bias, racism, and discrimination. And people have suffered because of it with their lives. They are dead. Make no mistake. So while everyone's patting themselves on the back because no one got a bullet in the head, doesn't mean that we don't have dead bodies and people aren't grieving and suffering. Examples. We've already talked about the homosexual community, and now newspaper.
Brenda, I just have to caution you that you have to stay away from, we know you have a complaint against the service, you have to stay away from that. You have to address this, and you also need to stay away from ongoing investigations, so, okay?
Well, the topic is bias, and what I'm trying to say is that although there was bias directed at the community, I haven't seen a public apology. I haven't seen anybody make amends to the community for what has happened. So whether or not there's a continuing investigation doesn't change the fact that nobody owned up to responsibility for what happened. So I'm not talking about the investigation per se. I'm talking about the way, the reactions to what we have so far discovered. And the announcements on the news that we are now bringing out some of the police dogs, poor little things, to sniff around 100 properties to see if we can find any more dead bodies chopped up in flower pots. Now, how would you like it if it was your family that we were all talking about? No one has come forward. I expect my chief of police to say something to the community, some bit of sorrow, some remorse for what's happened, even though you weren't responsible for the beginnings, the middle, but something to show people that the police are sorry, some little crumb, if you will. Now, the next thing about bias. When you start to accuse the police, they start with their behaviors of discredit and demonize and criminalize, and start to accuse that there's mental health issues. Now, all of this can be fine, this can be true or false, but it doesn't change the facts of the matter. And it's the facts of the matter that are important, not each little tiny picky thing that somebody can pick on. It doesn't matter if everyone would be insane. There are still people in the community that have died, that have been killed. And one thing has nothing to do with the other. And they're being confused. And that disturbs me. No person has taken any accountability for any of these matters. Not one bit of it. Next, as you all know, you've heard me, some of you, a number of times, talking about our own family. And I am disturbed that people do not think they have to look into historic bias. There is such a thing as historic bias. And it's unfolding as we speak because everyone wants to cover it up. Nobody wants to be responsible for pointing a finger and saying, oh my God, did this really happen? Let me clean up this mess. Let me see how I can fix it. Nobody will do that. Now, the last thing I would like to bring to your
Brenda,
attention.
you've got 1 minute. Please.
The last thing I would like to bring to your attention is how are you dealing with historic wrongs? How are you spinning these historic wrongs? Because they are being spun. So I'm going to request, for example, I have asked if the chief of police is in a conflict of interest regarding my problems, because when I hear the chair say, who's in a conflict, I don't hear anybody answer.
Again, you're addressing the corporate risk management report, and because you've got a complaint, you cannot bring that up here directly. So please just address the report.
I guess then I will close with this. In the near future, I think we have to stop confusing people actually being killed by the police, with people dying because of the police, with people suffering because of the police. So we need a part in the report that addresses those issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Colleagues, are there questions for Ms. Ross? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Staff Superintendent Carter, thank you again for your
Darren,
report.
can I
Colleagues,
help?
do you have questions, colleagues, for Staff Superintendent Carter on the report? Any comments? If not, again, Randy, I would just comment on what I think is, still a remarkable achievement of zero death in all the complexities. We see it time and time again. That's a remarkable achievement. So thank you, and Chief Saunders, thank you. If there are no other questions or comments, colleagues, may I have a motion to approve the deputations and the report, the annual corporate risk management report for 2017? Motion to approve. Mayor Tory, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried, thank you. That takes us to, I think, item number 16 was next, and that is the capital budget variance. Did you say there's a motion on that? And it's on the screen. So to amend it to add number 4, which is the forward a copy.
Number 4.
Yeah. Forward a copy of this report to the city's chief financial officer for considerations of recommendations 1, 2, and 3 as part of the city's overall capital budget variance report, et cetera, for the 3 months ended March 31st. With that amendment, if there's no other questions or comments, a motion to approve. Councillor Hart, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? And that leads us to item number 17, which is the operating budget variance report for the Toronto Police Services Board. And there's a deputation, and that's Derek Moran, who wants to have 19 seconds. So 5 minutes and 19 seconds.
You know what I like about this place, Chair Pringle? You guys actually post the motions on the screen before you vote on them, unlike sometimes at executive committee. So in this report, it mentions, in order to deal with this uncertainty, the 2018 budget includes a $529,000 contribution to a reserve for costs of independent legal advice. Fluctuations in legal spending will be dealt with by increasing or decreasing the budgeted reserve contribution in future years' operating budgets so that the board has funds available in the reserve for these valuable expenditures. So great. More money of ours going to lawyers, huh? So as I reminded Mayor Tory at Scarborough Executive Committee, did you ever hear about Viagra Gate at the City of Toronto? Mayor Tory was quoted in the Toronto Star as saying that we're trustees of the public's money. Well, same thing here. And much the same as the treasurer of the Law Society of Ontario, Paul Chabas, I think that's the way you pronounce his last name, once said in the Toronto Star that the role of the Law Society, which regulates legal services in Ontario, is to step back and be objective. We are answerable to the public and to the public interest. Well, you know what would be in the public interest if you're going to be spending more of our money on lawyers? I'm going to hand this in later to Carlene. This is a letter I recently got from the Honorable Jeffrey B. Morowitz, Regional Senior Justice, Superior Court of Justice. He says to me, in your correspondence, you inquire whether, with a valid application, a person, actually I've never used the word person to describe myself, has the right to inspect or obtain a copy of an oath subscribed under Section 4 of the Public Officers Act. Please be advised that it is the institution, such as the Police Services Board, that has the custody of the oath, or is under the control of the record of the oath, that has the authority to provide you access of its record. Since Mr. Rolfe, that's City of Toronto lawyer Nicholas Rolfe there, is employed by the City of Toronto Legal Department, and assuming that he gave such an oath as part of his employment, the City of Toronto is the institution where you must make such a request to inspect or obtain a copy of the oath. Now, it just so happens, I'm sure he got this. I recently, do you know that registered mail costs $11 just to send a single page to somebody? I sent one recently to Auditorium. I'm not going to read the whole thing. The title of this letter says, I require a copy of Mayor John Tory's subscribed oath pursuant to Section 4 of the Public Officers Act of Ontario. And at the end, I added, because, the first line of the Constitution talks about this, recognizes the supremacy of God. Mark 4:22, for there is nothing hid which shall not be manifested, neither was anything kept secret, but that it should come abroad, King James Version of the Bible. So when you guys hire these lawyers with our money, if I request a copy of their oath, it'll be held at this institution, like the senior justice said, who will be employing them. And who's in charge of vetting these lawyers anyways that you'll be hiring with our money? Do you hire just any old lawyers? How do you know that these lawyers you hire with our money are actually competent? You, Chair Pringle, should take a hands-on approach when it comes to choosing these lawyers and be the one vetting if they're actually competent enough to be paid with our money. So to help you, I came up with 6 simple questions you're going to want to ask them. 1, why do they need a license in order to do what they do? Because if you really think about it, a license is permission to perform an illegal, unlawful act. So one has to ask the question, what is the illegal, unlawful act a lawyer is performing that requires them to have a license first in order to do it? Is it because they are only practicing law, which implies they haven't learned how to properly do it yet? 2, get them to explain to you, Chair Pringle, Peter Hogg's clarification of Section 32.1 of the Constitution Act 1983. 3, for example, when someone like City of Toronto Director of Prosecutions, Callie Chapman, is in court acting as the pro se executor, is she attempting to convict the man, or is she attempting to convict the person, the legal entity that the life and being man has, or woman? I don't want to be sexist about this. 4, as the definition for attorney in the glossary section of the Attorney General's website says, a term for a lawyer more often used in the United States than what does an attorney attorn? 5, my favorite. Is it true that the Crown is the surety for the person we all have? And 6, is it true the legal system, acts, and statutes are not about right and wrong, as the legal system is all about surety and accounting, generating revenue for the Crown?
Derek, you're down to your 19 seconds.
And remind them of their oath that they took to the Law Society when answering these questions, which mentions, I shall not pervert the law to favor or prejudice anyone, but in all things I shall conduct myself honestly and with integrity and civility, because we all know how honest lawyers are.
Thank you, Derek. Colleagues, any questions of Derek? If not, Derek, you did use your full 19 seconds, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Chair Pringle, for being so upfront with me.
Colleagues, if there's no questions for Derek, this is actually the final item. Item number 17, we've had the deputation. It's the operating budget variance with the Toronto Police Services Board. May I have a motion to approve? Ms. Shantakusara and Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Is there any other business that colleagues want to bring before the board? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn? Mayor Tory, second by Ms. Shantakusara, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you, people.